Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to tackle something very important that everyone should know about. And those are the 7 things that you need to tackle to make sure your home does not look cheap. Hi, I'm Nina, an interior designer, and this channel, The Red Elevator, is where I break down what actually makes a space feel elevated beyond just styling or trends. Because when something feels cheap, it's usually not about price, it's about how everything is working together. Today, we are going through 7 subtle design mistakes I see all the time. The kinds of things that make a space feel off, even if everything in it is technically nice. Quick thing before we get into it, if you're new here, I'm going to ask you please to subscribe because we share so much interesting and pivotal information regarding how to make your home feel better, look better, and how ultimately it's going to make you live in a beautiful environment. So if you can, it's free. Just give us a little bit of a love and click subscribe. It really helps my team. It helps the people that are here every day working on these episodes to make sure that we can continue delivering this information. All right, number 1, hollow or lightweight materials. So this is one of those things people don't consciously clock, but they always feel it. You won't see it in photos, but when you're at somebody's house and their doors are hollow, automatically the entire home is assumed to be very cheap. A lot of the time, it comes down to visual weight as well. Pieces that are too thin, too light, or a little insubstantial for the scale of the room just don't hold their own. A coffee table with a super slim top, a console that feels almost flat against the wall, they don't anchor anything and they just sit there. And when that happens, the whole space starts to feel less grounded. Almost like everything is slightly floating instead of being placed with intention. In high-end interiors, you almost never see that. There's always a sense of substance, not necessarily heavy or bulky, but visually grounded pieces. You'll see thicker profiles, could be even a solid MDF door. It doesn't have to be a full piece of wood, but the weight of the door is very important. It doesn't mean everything has to be oversized either. It just means each piece needs to feel like it belongs in the space it's in. Because once your larger elements have enough weight, everything else starts to fall into place. The room feels a lot more authentic and a lot more elevated. The second problem I see are overly, perfectly symmetrical spaces. This is one of those things that feels right at first. Everything is balanced, everything is perfect, everything matches, everything is even, Steven. But the reality is that that's the problem. When everything is mirrored too perfectly, the space starts to feel like a cookie cutter home, basically like a builder grade home that doesn't have any interesting visual moments. And it's sort of like the default, click and cut and paste. So you do not need to do that as well in your furnishings, like identical chairs, everything evenly placed, everything symmetrical. It almost feels like a home that you would see like in the Stepford Wives. So in well-designed interiors, there's always a bit of tension. There's always something unexpected. There's a break in the symmetry that makes a space feel more layered and intentional. Of course, we believe in symmetry. A fireplace should always be centered in a room, but you always want to have a little element that makes your eye sort of wander and unexpectedly think, wow, this home is very chic. Perhaps you have a different material on one side than you have on the other, letting one piece stand on its own instead of forcing everything into a pair. And this is something I work through with clients at all the time because it's not always obvious what to change or where to break that balance without throwing the whole room off. If that's something you struggle with, I do offer one-on-one Zoom consultations where we go into your space together on Zoom and we talk about what it is that's bothering you, or if you have any dilemmas in your home, whether you're updating, whether you're remodeling. Many of you have told me that I have saved you a lot of money and that a lot of your fears have been acknowledged, and I have given actionable insight as to what to do to avoid mistakes. So if you're interested in that, just click the link in the description section. My Zoom calendar will pop up, and next thing you know, we'll be on a one-on-one And I've had the best time meeting all of you. It's been a great, great, great experience. And I really look forward to meeting each and every one of you. So don't be shy. All right. A little asymmetry is really what makes a space feel real. It's what gives it depth, personality, and that slightly effortless quality that high-end interiors always have. Because when everything isn't trying so hard to line up, the room finally has space to feel intentional. So, scale works the same way. It's not about matching sizes, it's about pieces that know how to share a room, which, speaking of, brings me to number 3. Let's talk about awkward scale relationships. This is one of the biggest reasons a space can feel slightly off, even when every single piece in it is technically beautiful. There's this assumption that as long as everything fits, it works. But what actually matters is how each piece relates and interacts with everything around it. You'll see a coffee table that's just a little too small for the sofa, lighting that feels undersized for the height of the room, or decor that doesn't quite hold its own against larger furniture. And nothing is dramatically wrong, but together it just doesn't land. This is why a lot of people love to purchase and return. That's one way I've seen people do their homes, is just by practicing buying and returning. But that is invariably a very wrong way to tackle this. You want to be able to understand scale, size, look at the measurements of the pieces that you're buying so that you're not constantly having to return and purchase, return and purchase. And by the way, there's always restocking fees, or there's at least a delivery fee that you are wasting money on. And it's better to be efficient the first time. And well-designed interior scale is always intentional. Larger pieces anchor the space and smaller ones support them. And everything feels connected through proportion. Proportion is where most people and most pedestrians, or shall we say regular people, average people that are not designers, get it wrong. And honestly, this is the same way I think about things outside of design too. Yes, mommy loves you. Mommy loves you. Okay, why don't we sit, baby? Oscar really wants to be a part of this episode. Anyway, because just like in a room where everything needs to relate properly, to feel cohesive, the same idea applies to how things are structured behind the scenes in a business. I wanted to say thank you to Relay for sponsoring today's video. I've been using Relay in my own work life to support my own business. It's an all-in-one platform that helps me keep everything organized in a way that actually makes sense. I can separate my money into different accounts for content, projects, expenses, instead of just looking at one number and trying to keep track of everything mentally. As you guys know, I am an interior designer, but I also have my MBA, so being financially responsible and having the tools to help my life are quite important. There are no hidden fees, by the way, with Relay. No minimum balances are required, which makes it feel really straightforward, and it gives me a clear view of what I'm earning, spending, and setting aside. This is basic business 101. So I'm making decisions based on what actually is happening, not just what I think is happening and what I'm guessing is happening. And it's the same principle here. When everything is structured properly and working in relation to each other, the whole thing just feels more intentional. That's what makes a space, or anything really, feel elevated. Even when everything feels elevated, something may seem a little off. And that's my next talking point. Inconsistent undertones drive me bananas. And it's one of the main reasons a space feels off, even when everything is technically nice. So you'll have a warm wood table, for example, a cooler toned floor, maybe a sofa pulling slightly gray, and metals that don't quite relate. Nothing looks obviously wrong on its own, but together, it just doesn't come together. So you have to take into account what the tones are. You don't have to match your metals. You can mix everything. You can mix your wood tones, but remember, it's the undertone that matters. As long as your undertone is consistent, then you can bring in different subtle hues of the same shade in the same tone. Everything feels that it's slightly competing instead of working together if you don't do this, which makes a space read less elevated. In more considered interiors, or interiors that we design for clients, there's always a clear undertone, whether it's warm, cool, neutral, and everything else is layered. We recently did an office for a client, a very large sort of concrete office, And because our floors were concrete and the client loves stainless steel cabinets, we really had to lean into our cool colors. But it didn't mean everything had to be silver. It meant that we're going to have cool undertones in the finishes and in the fixtures and in the furniture that we are purchasing. So instead of mixing pieces randomly, identify your base undertone and build from there. Because once that's in place, the entire room feels more cohesive without you having to change much at all. That being said, undertones are only half the story. The other half is sheen, and it's just as invisible when it's right and just as jarring when it's wrong. Now to my next point, wrong sheen levels. This one is a bit subtle, very hard to clock, but once you notice it, you start seeing it everywhere. So I'm sorry if I can't make you unsee this, but a space will look perfectly styled, the furniture great, the layout wonderful, everything feels really great, and then there's something flat. And the reason is almost always the same thing. Everything is finished in the exact same way. So matte floors, matte countertops, matte cabinets, matte finishes, matte fixtures, matte walls, matte. And unless you're making a matte statement, which doesn't really work unless everything is one color and you're doing an artistic installation in a gallery, that's not going to work. So you need to have different sheens, telling a different story on different pieces. Having a lacquered piano against a matte floor, that works. If you didn't have a piano, perhaps then the floor could be glossy and beautiful. So again, it depends what's intersecting with the other. In more elevated interiors, finish is doing just as much work as color or shape. You'll see a mix. Something matte grounds the space, something with a soft sheen will catch the light. And that's why things with sheen can very much be interesting. There was a time where everybody said shiny is cheesy, and everybody moved to matte, and then everybody said matte is dead. And we realized through all of these different exercises that we need a combination. So that was the consensus among society as a whole, that we can't do everything in one tone or another. It is that beautiful mix. Just like we mix periods and furniture, we mix sheens in our composition of different things in a room. So the fix is very simple, but it requires you to start paying attention to how things reflect light. At night is different than during the day. And instead of defaulting to one finish across everything, just start layering. A matte wall against a slightly reflective surface, a soft diffused fabric next to something more polished. You know, my kitchen had lacquered cabinet, so we did a matte countertop, and then we brought in some polished accessories, you know, a nice mix of things. Because once you introduce that contrast, the entire space falls together and there's so much dimension and it just feels expensive. You know how you walk into a bar that's newly done in a beautiful hotel and you're about to have a little cocktail and you say to yourself, why does this look so good? And you can't put your finger on it. Well, there are many elements why it looks great, but one of them is definitively somebody who has taken a lot of time to pay attention to the sheen. Next time you guys are in a new space that's been recently done, I want you to pay attention, or a very elevated space that works, I want you to pay attention to where the sheen is and where the matte surfaces are, and then apply those to your space. Next problem I see time and time again is lack of shadow and depth. So this is about lighting that flattens the space. This is one of the biggest reasons a room never quite reaches that finished high-end feel, even when everything is beautiful. So as you guys have noticed in this episode, I have talked about so many things that go wrong. If you take the totality of all of these 10 recommendations and make these changes, it'll be transformative. You will have the knowledge of what a professional interior designer that's been doing this for decades is doing. You guys can do that. So the pattern usually looks like this. You have overhead lighting, maybe one lamp, everything is evenly lit, and it feels fine, clean, bright, nothing technically wrong. But when you walk into a space that's done correctly in terms of visual lighting, that's when your mouth drops and you say, why can't I have a house like this? And a lot of it, most of it is lighting. Because when everything is lit the same way and the same intensity and evenly, that is the biggest mistake of all. Builder grade homes, or most homes, have track lighting. You know, mine isn't, luckily. Somebody knew what they were doing here. Not completely, but there are some things I would change, of course. but my ceilings don't have a symmetrical pattern of lights. If you look at most homes, you look up onto the ceiling, you will notice 9 cans, all equidistant, boom. And everybody thinks that's how it should be done. No, lighting is about lighting specific items in a room, period, end of story. That's why having a furniture plan is important. Now, having a light that rotates is also important, so that if you move things around, your light, your eyeball, will also move with that furniture. Today, there are so many products out there that have replaced overhead lighting, recessed lighting, and those are the fixtures that we are recommending in high-end projects, and those are the fixtures that you guys have access to as well. They're not incrementally more expensive, they are just available. And once you introduce that beauty into your home and light the things that are important, your room will transform. Something that I really like to recommend is to add additional secondary lighting, ambient lighting, such as floor lamps. I've got one. Table lamps, I've got them. Sometimes little sconces or wall sconces, little lamps that we're putting on tables that are LED lit. They're everywhere. They're great. You can even buy them on Amazon. Pardon me. It's a client calling. Now, once you introduce that contrast, the entire space starts to feel deeper, more atmospheric, more romantic, more fun. And definitely people are going to want to come over to your house because they're going to look better in your home. The last and final issue that I have that really kills a room is that everything in the room has the same visual intensity. Let me explain. The last one is subtle, but it completely changes whether the space feels elevated or overwhelming. So a lot of rooms don't actually have bad pieces in them. The problem is that every single thing is trying to command the same amount of attention at once. So that's when you buy like 10 of your favorite pieces and then put them all in the same room and then expect people to think that it looks good. No, it doesn't. The lighting is sculptural. The chairs are sculptural. The coffee table is sculptural. Everything is wow. And then you just have now over jazzy, kind of like a Vegas vibe that you were not intending. So I see this a lot with a lot of my clients who, when I show them something very simple, they're like, well, I hired an interior designer because I want things to be wow. And now you're just presenting a sisal rug or a framed mirror that is very simple. And the reason I do that is because the only way to get a very elevated, edited, high-end, fabulous room is to have the tension between the pieces that are jazzy and the pieces that are absolutely over the top plain. That contrast, that tension between very plain and jazzy is what makes for really good design. So don't be afraid to buy the sisal rug and throw it in your $10 million home. We do it regularly. Don't be afraid to buy that uber simple, square, 90-degree edged mirror because it's leaning in front of the most sculptural sofa you've ever seen. If the sculptural sofa is in front of a sculptural mirror, which has a sculptural base, and then there's a sculptural chair, you would cringe. So in more elevated interiors, there's always hierarchy. One piece leads, the others support. Dramatic light fixture might sit against a quieter piece of furniture and be the story. So look for those jazzy pieces, espouse them, display them, light them, but make sure you know when to stop. Restraint is as important in design as spending. I would argue that this last piece of advice, which is why I kept it for the end, is probably the most impactful decision that you can make, and you can do that today. I urge all of you, now that it's spring, we have a little pep in our step, which I do, go and reposition things in your room, in your space. Take out things that are just too busy and highlight the things that are really ornate and that are beautiful and put them something next to simple. Just moving things around and putting things away in the cabinet is just as good. Put things away and pay attention to the good things that you love. I hope that helps. And I hope this was a very interesting episode. I love talking about what not to do because it leads people to do what they need to do. So if something in this video spoke to you, make sure and save it. Make sure and comment. I would love to know if you're going to actually get up and move things around or if any of these hit home. I love you guys, and I can't wait to see you on this channel next week on The Red Elevator.